In this Diablo 4 video, I'll be showing you our blood-soaked Barbarian build. This is a level 50 version of our Bloody Barbarian that you might have seen the video for earlier, and this kind of continues it on into World Tier 3 and shows you how to change the build so that it's viable in this difficulty of the game. A lot of people are wondering about what Barbarian build to play now that Whirlwind has been nerfed from the patch, and I can tell you that Whirlwind can still be played, so don't worry, you can still do it. It's obviously not as effective as it once was, but if you're looking for a good alternative, then this build is for you. This build is extremely fun to play, and it requires you to constantly engage with different combos and to adjust your strategy depending on what's happening on the battlefield, allowing it to remain fresh even after a long play session. First, you'll notice we're not using any basic skills to generate fury, except while fighting bosses. Instead, we're using a combination of leap and ground stomp to start off engagements. This will generate enough fury to get Rend going, as well as creating 2 pair of earthquakes that deal physical damage and provide both increased damage and damage reduction. While enemies are stunned, we'll use Rend and start applying bleed until the bar is almost full, then we'll use Rupture to instantly consume the remaining bleed on enemies. Rupture will heal us for 15% of our max health and create both a blood explosion and a blood pool, both dealing even more bleeding damage to any remaining enemies. For big groups of enemies, we'll use Challenging Shout to reduce incoming damage and further boost fury acquisition, while we keep Iron Skin as a last resort for when we are crowd controlled or really low on health. As previously mentioned, we'll need to swap some skills to make this work on Tier 3, as we won't be able to maintain fury generation just by smashing enemies with Death Blow. We'll also be getting some passives to boost our bleeding damage as well as increasing our survivability, as enemies hit much harder later on in the game and we'll be standing right in front of them while we bathe in their blood. So moving on to the skills, first up is Flay. For starters, we're going to take out Frenzy and take Flay instead. You're only going to use Flay during boss fights, as your regular leap combo won't generate enough fury. The added bleed damage in combination with Battle Flay, which further boosts our regular attacks, is perfect to make up for that. To swap from leap into Flay before a boss fight, simply open the skill menu and replace them on the fly. Notice that this doesn't require any type of respec. You have both skills, you will simply be swapping them. Next we have Rupture. We're going to remove Death Blow to make space for our main skill, Rupture. The main thing about Rupture is that it gets a cooldown reduced for each point you assign into it. This is further reduced by the Fields of Crimson unique, which gives us even more cooldown reduction in combination with many plus Rupture levels. To make it even better, we'll be using the Weapon Master's aspect, which gives us 1 additional charge, allowing you to use it twice in rapid succession or to space it out, but keep its constant uptime. Next we have Leap and Ground Stomp. Leap and Ground Stomp synergize amazingly thanks to a series of combos. For starters, the aspect of Perpetual Stomping allows you to reset Leap's cooldown after using Ground Stomp. This will allow you to Leap, Stomp, and have Leap available right away, either for repositioning or to generate more fury. The second combination is achieved by equipping both the aspect of Bulk Hathos and Earthquake aspect. Aspect of Bulk Hathos creates an Earthquake that deals damage over time and increases damage reduction, while the Earthquake aspect also creates an Earthquake that deals damage over that and increases damage output. The great thing is that you'll get both bonuses while you stand on any Earthquake, meaning that by just using either Leap or Ground Stomp, you'll get both increased damage and damage reduction. Moving on and talking a little bit about the passives we use, monsters hit much harder as you progress towards higher levels, and you'll need more health as well as damage reduction. Imposing Presence boosts your health by a massive 15%, which works great with a max health heal from Rupture, while Martial Vigor and Pit Fighter increase damage reduction. To increase our damage, we'll start by getting the Gushing Wounds key passive. This makes it so bleed has a critical chance. When a critical strike happens when applying bleed, that amount will be increased in proportion to your critical strike damage, greatly increasing the amount of bleeding we apply. Thanks to this, we'll be able to take advantage of the No Mercy and Heavy-Handed passives. In addition, Overpowering will create a blood explosion similar to Rupture. Another great combo is by using Expose Vulnerability, which will allow you to apply Vulnerable to everything by using Rend after a Rupture attack. For this reason, you'll also want to assign points into Cut to the Bone, which increases our bleeding damage against vulnerable targets. When it comes to weapon expertise and technique, you'll be using Fields of Crimson for this build, meaning that its expertise will give you 20% of your direct damage inflicted as bleeding damage over 5 seconds, as well as plus 30% increased bleeding damage for 5 seconds after killing an enemy. Make sure you're using Slashing Weapon for both Rend and Rupture. For the weapon technique, you'll want to take the Two-Handed Axe, which increases damage to vulnerable enemies by 15%. You'll be constantly killing bleeding enemies, so you'll get full use of this expertise, and the vulnerable effect applied by the Exposed Vulnerability passive allows us to take advantage of the additional vulnerable damage. Most of our combos are acquired through combining different aspects, so you'll want to focus on getting as many as possible before transitioning into this build. The Barbarian has 12 equipment slots, and it's easy to get overwhelmed on what you should keep or replace while leveling up, and you'll be constantly updating your gear. So we're going to take a look first at some legendary aspects that you can find using the Codex of Power, and the first one is Aspect of the Umbral, which is perfect for generating a burst of fury when using Ground Stomp on a pack of enemies. The next is Slaking Aspect, which helps with fury generation when dealing with waves of enemies. Another one is Aspect of Anemia, which has a lucky hit chance to stun bleeding enemies for 2 seconds. This synergizes perfectly with our bleeding and other stun effects. Aspect of Perpetual Stomping. This allows you to reset Leap's cooldown by using Ground Stomp. This is crucial to make the build work, so get this one as soon as you can. Aspect of Retribution. This aspect proportionally increases your damage against stunned enemies. You should equip it on your amulet for plus 50% efficiency. Aspect of Volcathos. Makes it so Leap creates an earthquake when you land, dealing damage over time. Standing on the earthquake will provide you with a damage reduction. Aspect of the Iron Warrior. This will be your only unstoppable mechanic, so make sure to get it as soon as possible. It'll give you increased damage reduction while Iron Skin is active as well. And lastly, Iron Blood aspect. This is great to deal with a big pack of enemies, providing damage reduction in proportion to the amount of bleeding enemies near you. Moving along to aspects that you can get from drops, first is Fields of Crimson, which is a unique weapon. This is the best item for this build, greatly increasing Rupture's capabilities. The plus rank and reduced cooldown work together, greatly reducing the time it takes to recharge this skill. The unique Blood Pool effect works amazing both against bosses and packs of enemies, greatly enhancing your bleeding damage, which is further boosted by its other 2 affixes. But you can still make this build without this weapon, finding it will make a huge difference. Weapon Master's aspect. Your weapon mastery skills have an additional charge. Lucky hit damaging an enemy with a weapon mastery skill has up to a 50% chance to stun them for 2 seconds. Aspect of Encroaching Wrath. After spending 100 Fury, your next Rupture will deal up to 100% more damage, providing an immense damage boost. This is doubled when slotted into your 2-handed weapon. Make sure to slot it into your 2-handed bludgeoning weapon, as you won't be able to slot it onto your Fields of Crimson. This is important because if you slot it into your 2-handed slashing weapon, you'll have to re-slot it, and since it's an extraction-only aspect, you might not have that chance. Skullbreaker's aspect. Similar to Rupture, this will cause damage based on the total bleeding when you stun an enemy, but it won't consume the bleed. You can stun enemies with both Ground Stomp and Aspect of Anemia, synergizing perfectly. Earthquake aspect. This allows Ground Stomp to create an earthquake that deals damage over time. Standing on earthquakes increases your damage. Moving on to the bonuses on your gear, what you should look out for is damage with 2-handed slashing weapons, plus rank to Rupture, Rend, and other skills, damage to bleeding enemies, damage over time, damage to slowed enemies, core skill damage, physical skill damage, damage to stunned enemies, damage to close enemies, and vulnerable damage. When it comes to defense, you want damage reduction from close enemies, maximum life, and anything that provides damage reduction. When it comes to gems on your weapon, you want to slot Amethyst for increased damage over time, on armor you want Rubies for max health, and on your jewelry you want to try and compensate for any resistances that you're lacking. When it comes to Paragon, you want to be on the lookout for the Bloodfeeder glyph, which increases damage against bleeding enemies, and you want to try and allocate at least 25 dexterity around it. This will activate the additional bonus, increasing critical strike chance against bleeding enemies. Try to get as many strength nodes as possible, but also make sure to fulfill the socketed glyph requirements of its radius to acquire its additional bonuses. Once you reach the top, you'll have to decide what Paragon board to go for, and I recommend the Blood Rage board, as its legendary node will grant you an easy way to acquire Berserking. Once you have enough points, make sure to find a socket that fits the requirements for the Disembowel glyph, as its additional bonus will greatly increase the uptime of this build. Final tips. Remember to replace Leap with Flay before fighting a boss. This will help with your Fury regeneration and increase single target bleeding damage. While traveling through dungeons, you can use Leap to move faster and use Ground Stomp against random enemies to reset its cooldown, but only do this if you're not expecting a fight, as your Ground Stomp will be on cooldown. If an enemy dies before you rip your weapon out while using Rupture, the explosion won't take place, so make sure to use it with enough time and always aim for bigger enemies. Make sure to upgrade your Field of Crimson, as it'll provide you with more Rupture levels and increase cooldown reduction. Try to wait until you're low on health to trigger Iron Skin, as this will greatly increase its barrier efficiency. And lastly, when engaging enemies, go for elites first and make sure that your Ground Stomp stuns them to maximize damage against them. So that wraps up our Blood-Soaked Barbarian build. I hope you guys found this helpful, and it gives you a good alternative to the Whirlwind Barbarian for those of you looking for another type of play that you can do. And this one is very, very dynamic. It has a rotation that you want to try and nail every time, and it's not just holding down one button. Stay tuned for more Diablo 4 build guides, and if you have questions, please leave them in the comments below.
Thank you.